She stood there in the corner of the supply room, clipboard in hand, counting boxes that nobody else cared about. Her green uniform was always pressed, always perfect, but her eyes told a different story. Sergeant Maria Chen had been at Fort Bragg for 3 years, and in those 3 years, she had become invisible. Not because she wanted to be, but because that's what happened when you were the quiet one, the one who never caused trouble, the one who just did her job. The scars on her arms were visible when she rolled up her sleeves. Burns, mostly. Some jagged lines that looked like they came from something sharp. New recruits would stare, whisper behind her back, make jokes they thought she couldn't hear. Private Jenkins was the worst. Always laughing, always pointing, always making sure everyone knew that the supply sergeant was an easy target. What they didn't know was where those scars came from. What they didn't know could fill volumes. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. The general was making his rounds, something he did once a quarter to check on the troops. General Morrison was old school, the kind of officer who believed in knowing every soldier under his command. He walked through the mess hall, through the barracks, and finally, into the supply depot. Private Jenkins and his buddies were there, lounging against the shelves when they should have been working. They were in the middle of another joke about Sergeant Chen when the general walked in. She was bent over a crate, checking inventory, her scarred arms fully visible in the fluorescent light. "Hey Sarge," Jenkins called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Did you get those scars fighting off hangers in the closet? Or maybe a box fell on you?" The other recruits erupted in laughter. Sergeant Chen didn't even look up. She had learned long ago that reacting only made it worse. She just kept counting, kept writing, kept being invisible. But General Morrison heard it. He stopped in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He looked at Jenkins, then at the other recruits, then at the sergeant who was pretending she hadn't heard anything. "Sergeant Chen," the general's voice cut through the laughter like a knife. "Would you step forward, please?" The room went silent. Maria felt her heart drop into her stomach. This was it. She was finally going to get reprimanded for causing trouble, for being the source of disruption, even though she never said a word. She set down her clipboard and walked toward the general, her eyes down, her posture military perfect despite the fear running through her veins. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. General Morrison looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He came to attention and saluted her. "It's an honor to finally meet you, Nighthawk," he said. The nickname hit the room like a bomb. Nighthawk. Every soldier knew that name. It was legendary. Nighthawk was the call sign of the Special Operations helicopter pilot who had flown one of the most dangerous rescue missions in recent military history. Nighthawk was the pilot who had gone into hostile territory alone, against orders, to extract a team of Rangers who were pinned down and out of options. Nighthawk was the pilot whose helicopter had been shot down, who had sustained catastrophic injuries, and who had still managed to hold off enemy forces long enough for backup to arrive, saving 12 lives in the process. Nighthawk was a hero. Nighthawk had a Medal of Honor. And Nighthawk was standing right in front of them in a supply depot at Fort Bragg. Private Jenkins felt his face go white. The clipboard fell from his hands, clattering on the concrete floor. The other recruits stood frozen, their earlier laughter dying in their throats. Sergeant Chen, Maria Chen, kept her eyes forward, but the general could see the slight tremor in her jaw. She hadn't wanted this. She had worked so hard to leave that life behind, to be normal, to be just another soldier doing her job. "At ease, Sergeant," the general said, dropping his salute. "I've been meaning to come see you. I wanted to thank you personally for your service. What you did that night in Kandahar saved lives. American lives. You're a hero, and don't let anyone tell you different." Maria swallowed hard. "I was just doing my job, sir. Any pilot would have done the same." "No," General Morrison said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Your Black Hawk was hit by an RPG at 4,000 feet. You had multiple engine failures, hydraulic failures, and you still managed to land that bird without killing everyone on board. Then, with a fractured spine, broken ribs, and burns over 30% of your body, you held that position for 45 minutes against enemy combatants until reinforcements arrived. That's not just doing your job. That's extraordinary courage." The general turned to face the recruits, his eyes hard as granite. "Let me tell you all something about Sergeant Chen. Those scars you think are funny. She got those saving your brothers in arms. She got those burns pulling injured Rangers out of a burning helicopter while taking enemy fire. She got those wounds being a better soldier than most of you will ever be. And instead of accepting a cushy desk job at the Pentagon, instead of touring around giving speeches and collecting accolades, she chose to come here, to Fort Bragg, to serve in the supply depot. Do you know why? Nobody answered. Jenkins looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Because Sergeant Chen is humble. Because she doesn't want special treatment. Because she believes in service, real service, not glory. That's the kind of soldier you should aspire to be. The general looked back at Maria. I know you don't like the attention, Sergeant. I know you want to be left alone to do your work. But these young soldiers need to understand what real honor looks like. They need to know that heroes don't always look like what they see in the movies. Sometimes heroes look like a quiet supply sergeant with scars on her arms. Maria finally met his eyes. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. I didn't do it to be a hero. I did it because those men needed help, and I was the only one who could reach them. That's all. I don't want special treatment. I don't want to be put on a pedestal. I just want to do my job and be a good soldier. General Morrison smiled, a rare expression on his weathered face. And that, Sergeant, is exactly what makes you a hero. Carry on. He turned and left the supply depot, leaving behind a room full of stunned recruits and one very uncomfortable sergeant. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Private Jenkins stepped forward. His face was red, his eyes wet. He came to attention and saluted. Sergeant Chen, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was wrong. I was cruel, and I'm sorry. Maria looked at him, this boy who had made her life miserable for months, and she saw what she had once been. Young, stupid, eager to fit in, not understanding the weight of real consequences. At ease, Private, she said quietly. Just learn from this, and maybe think before you speak next time. Jenkins nodded, unable to meet her eyes. The other recruits stood in silence, shame written across their faces. As the days passed, word spread through Fort Bragg like wildfire. The quiet supply sergeant was Nighthawk. The woman they had ignored, dismissed, or mocked was one of the most decorated pilots in special operations history. Soldiers who had never given her a second glance suddenly found reasons to visit the supply depot. They wanted to shake her hand, to thank her, to hear her story. But Maria didn't want to tell her story. She had lived it, and that was enough. The nightmares still came, the memories of fire and screaming and the awful sound of metal tearing apart. The scars on her arms were nothing compared to the scars inside, the ones that nobody could see. She had chosen the supply depot because it was quiet, because it was routine, because counting boxes didn't require her to fly into danger or make split-second decisions that determined who lived and who died. She had chosen invisibility because being a hero had nearly destroyed her. But something changed after that day with General Morrison. The recruits who came to the supply depot now came with respect. They listened when she gave instructions. They didn't mock her scars. And slowly, carefully, some of them started asking questions. Not about the mission, not about the Medal of Honor. They asked about service, about courage, about how to be better soldiers. And Maria, despite her desire for privacy, found herself answering. Because she realized that maybe this was another kind of service. Maybe teaching these young soldiers about real honor, real sacrifice, real humility was just as important as anything she had done in that helicopter over Kandahar. Private Jenkins became one of her most dedicated students. The shame of his earlier behavior motivated him to be better, to learn everything he could from the woman he had once mocked. He spent extra hours in the supply depot, not just doing his assigned work but asking Maria about leadership, about decision-making under pressure, about how to stay calm when everything around you is falling apart. One evening, after most of the other soldiers had left, Jenkins worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering him since that day with the general. Sergeant Chen, can I ask you something personal? Maria looked up from her inventory sheets. Depends on the question, Private. Why did you do it? Why did you go in alone when you knew it was basically a suicide mission? You had to know the odds were against you. Maria was quiet for a long moment. She set down her pen and looked at the young soldier in front of her. Because it was the right thing to do. Those Rangers were good men, Jenkins. They had families, people who loved them, whole lives ahead of them. I had the skills and the equipment to reach them. Saying no, staying safe while they died, that wasn't an option I could live with. I knew the risks. I accepted them. That's what service means. But you almost died. You gave up your flying career. You live with pain every day. Was it worth it? Maria smiled, a sad but genuine expression. Every single one of those 12 men went home to their families. They got to hug their kids, kiss their wives, live their lives. Yeah, Private, it was worth it. Jenkins nodded slowly, processing this. I want to be like that. Like you. I want to be the kind of soldier who does the right thing, even when it's hard. Then start by doing the right thing in small ways, every day, Maria told him. Integrity isn't something you save for big moments. It's something you practice constantly, in every decision you make. Be kind to your fellow soldiers. Do your job well, even when nobody's watching. Stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. That's how you become a good soldier. That's how you become a good person. The weeks turned into months. The supply depot at Fort Bragg became known not just as a place to get equipment, but as a place where soldiers could learn from someone who truly understood what service meant. Maria never sought the spotlight, never told war stories, never bragged about her accomplishments, but her example spoke louder than words ever could. She taught them that heroism wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about doing what needed to be done, regardless of personal cost. She taught them that strength wasn't about never being afraid, but about acting despite fear. She taught them that true honor was found in humility, in service, in putting others before yourself. And slowly, Fort Bragg began to change. The culture of mockery, of finding the weakest link and exploiting it, began to shift. Soldiers started looking out for each other more, supporting each other, understanding that everyone carried their own invisible scars. The quiet supply sergeant had started a revolution, not through speeches or demands, but simply by being herself and letting her life speak for itself. General Morrison watched these changes with satisfaction. He knew what he had done that day in the supply depot. He had given those young soldiers a gift, the gift of seeing real heroism up close, of understanding that extraordinary courage often comes in ordinary packages. Years later, when Private Jenkins had become Sergeant Jenkins, he would tell new recruits about the day he learned what real honor looked like. He would tell them about the quiet supply sergeant with scars on her arms, about his own shame and stupidity, about the general who had opened his eyes to the truth. And he would tell them that the greatest soldiers aren't always the loudest or the most confident or the most decorated. Sometimes the greatest soldiers are the ones who serve quietly, who carry their burdens with grace, who choose humility over glory, who understand that real heroism is measured not in medals but in lives saved and duties fulfilled. Sergeant Maria Chen continued her work in the supply depot, counting boxes, managing inventory, being exactly what she wanted to be, a good soldier doing her job. But she was never invisible again, not really. Because once you've seen true heroism, once you've understood what real sacrifice looks like, you can never unsee it. The scars remained, visible reminders of a night in Kandahar when one pilot chose courage over caution, duty over safety, service over self. And those scars became something different in the eyes of those who knew the truth. They became badges of honor, testaments to the kind of soldier, the kind of person, that Maria Chen had chosen to be. That's the story they don't always tell you about heroes. They're not all larger than life. Some of them are quiet. Some of them just want to do their jobs. But when the moment comes, when lives hang in the balance, they rise to meet it. And then, when the dust settles and the smoke clears, they go back to being regular people, carrying their scars and their memories and their unshakable commitment to doing what's right. Private Jenkins had laughed at those scars once. Now, like so many others at Fort Bragg, he understood what they really represented: courage, sacrifice, and the truest form of heroism. The kind that doesn't seek recognition, but earns it anyway.